Thank you, Skip, for asking me to join you today, and Marissa, thank you for the very, very generous introduction. We have had lightning, rain, torrential rain, hail. I was out the car a few minutes ago, and I'm waiting for the locusts, so that's the next move. So maybe someone's trying to tell me something. I think if I ask everybody in this room your ancestry, you could tell me. Because in a land of immigrants, where we come is very important in terms of our personal identity. We have been shaped by 4 waves of immigration. The first 2 waves were from Western and Northern Europe and Africans who were brought here forcibly as slaves. The 3rd wave began in the 1870s, and the source of immigration shifted from Northern and Western Europe to Eastern and Southern Europe and Asia. This wave ended with the Great Depression. Our current wave, the 4th wave, began in the mid-1970s, accelerated in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We may begin to see that wave of immigration taper off, but once again, our immigration shifts to a different region of the world. The majority of immigrants to the United States today come from Latin America and Asia. These 4 waves of immigration have defined America and made us great. No nation in history has accepted, although sometimes reluctantly, more people from more backgrounds than the United States. The miracle that is America, this great experiment, is that such a diverse collection of people can live together in peace. And now, as in our past, we are in the process of redefining what it means to be an American. We're in the midst of one of the greatest demographic transformations in the nation's history. And the 2010 census was telling, and there's some recent data which updates the census. Let me share these figures with you. In 2012, 40 million of our 315 million people were foreign-born. Adding the 36 million residents born here with at least one foreign-born parent, 1 out of every 4 people in the United States is either a first or a second-generation immigrant. Let me share 2 other census statistics that you might find surprising. Beginning next decade, in about 10 years, the majority of children in the United States will be from minorities, African American, Hispanic, and Asian. In the decade that follows, the majority of Americans will be from minorities. So in the next 30 years, the United States will become significantly more racially and ethnically diverse than it is today. As with other domestic issues, Americans are deeply divided about the benefits and the long-term effects of our current immigration policy. As a result, immigration has become one of the hot-button issues in our American political scene. The 2012 presidential election was a game-changer in my mind because, as you know, Hispanics and Asian voters helped to re-elect President Obama. The Republican Party has had some soul-searching since the election. I think Lindsey Graham maybe led that reanalysis. I found on the web a new super PAC group called Republicans for Immigration Reform, and these groups are forming with the hope of repairing the political damage left by years of anti-immigration rhetoric. I believe these changes set the stage for the best chance for comprehensive immigration reform in a generation. And I also strongly believe that this nation, on this and other issues, need a civil, and I argue civil, civic debate on immigration. Some of you may be familiar with Jeb Bush's new book, Immigration Wars. It was met with a firestorm on both the right and the left. He advocates for secure borders, a normalized immigration policy, more work-based legal immigration, more power to states to enforce immigration laws and determine what type of services are going to be provided, for me, most importantly, he recommends a path to citizenship for DREAM Act youth and young adults. It's a reasoned agenda. Not everyone's going to agree with it, but I think it begins a civil civic debate. And that's what I hope my book does, Right to Dream: Immigration Reform in America's Future. My goals were as follows. First of all, I'm a sociologist. And sociology has been studying immigration for over a century. And when I would read and when I would look at the media, I would see all these statements made by anti-immigration groups, and none of them held water. So what I wanted to do in the book was to answer the critics by using social science research, and that's what I do in the first 5 chapters. I then go ahead and explain the DREAM Act. I put a face on some dreamers, and 2 of them are here today, Zesna and Juan. I hope you'll get to talk to them a little later. And then I, at the end of the book, advocate next steps for immigration reform. Here's the outline of the book. Part 1 is composed of 5 chapters. It answers the critics. And then the second half of the book gives you the nuts and bolts of the DREAM Act, deferred action, immigration law. I introduce and profile Ben and Juan and Zesna, and then the final chapter, as I said before, is where we go from here. What I'd like to do today is simply go through the first five chapters very quickly, and then talk about the DREAM Act. The first chapter is, these children are blameless. And the argument made by the anti-immigration people are on legal grounds, and this is their argument. Undocumented students are criminals. They broke the law. The DREAM Act rewards criminal behavior. These people should go home. They should self-deport. That's the argument. What I did in the book is I went back to a landmark Supreme Court ruling, Plyler v. Doe. James Plyler was the superintendent of the Tyler, Texas Consolidated School District. And in the 1970s, as some of you know, the state of Texas passed a law which allowed school districts to deny educational benefits to young people, to children. It was found to be unconstitutional on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and Justice William Brennan wrote for the majority. And if you get a chance, it's available on audio. Take a listen, and then compare it to the Voting Act's discussion. It's also available on the web. I think back then, not the impression I came back, you had the best minds in the society in a room trying to come out with what was best for the nation. I don't know if that's the case anymore. But this is Brennan's argument. The federal government has the responsibility of enforcing our immigration laws. It clearly has not done its job because we had, back in the 80s, as we do today, millions of unauthorized people living in our midst. But he makes an important distinction between adults and children. He argues that children are blameless. They were brought here, they did not come here, they did not have agency in the decision to come to the U.S. They're innocent. He then goes on and talks about the role of education in our democracy. We cannot have a democracy without educated citizens. These children cannot fully participate in this society if they don't have an education, at least a K-12 education. Without education, we would be creating a permanent underclass. And in his final paragraph, he says, it is in our common good. Do you ever hear that in our political discourse anymore? It's in our common good. It is in our common good that we provide K-12 education for all children, regardless of immigration status. And what I argue in the book is that what the DREAM Act is a straightforward extension of the rationale of Plyler v. Doe to higher education. So that's the first chapter. The second chapter is Immigration 101, and when you look at the critics of immigration reform, you don't think they, you know they've never looked at the literature on immigration. This is their argument. Pass the DREAM Act and the unauthorized will come to the United States to take advantage of educational benefits. I have been doing research on the Hispanic community in Northwest Arkansas now for 5 years. I have interviewed and received biographies from almost 50 young people. I've done focus groups, I've attended their meetings, I've talked to hundreds. Not one has a family that came here for educational benefits. They came here because of the promise of economic opportunities. They came here to avoid a civil war. They came here to avoid an abusive husband. They came here for medical care because they would have died in the country in which they were living, and they came here to be with their families. Nowhere in the discussion is anything come up about educational benefits. Sociologists for over a half-century have used something called the push-pull model to describe why people move and where they go and how they're treated. And the push-pull model has 4 variables. What are the factors that lead to groups of people being pushed out of their native country? What are the factors that pull people into a new society? What are the intervening barriers? For example, a militarized southern border with Mexico, or the cost and the danger associated with migrating. And finally, what's the role of social networks? Virtually every young person I talk to had family already living in Northwest Arkansas before their families moved to the United States. What we know is that people who are pulled into a country for the economic opportunities found there are fundamentally different than the people left behind. It's called the mover-stayer model. The movers, the people that come here, are better educated, they're entrepreneurial, they're more hardworking, they're in their prime working years. They work in economic niches Americans ignored, and they bring a higher education and a higher skill level than the people left behind. They have a strong work ethic, and they pass these values on to their children. That's part of our American experience. You all know that. Your ancestor did that. So the evidence is overwhelming that immigration contributes to economic growth that benefits all Americans. The third chapter is spend $1 trillion a year and you're a tax burden. And this is the argument made by the critics. Undocumented residents are a tax burden. They consume services and do not pay their way. They exacerbate state budget shortfalls, and they contribute little to the economy and less to the tax base. How could they have gotten it so wrong? In 2010, Hispanics contributed over $1 trillion of spending power to the U.S. economy. If they're a country unto themselves, they would be the 14th largest economy in the world. That number is expected to grow to $1.5 trillion by the year 2015. Asians, smaller in number, contributed about half a trillion dollars to the national economy in 2010, and that number is supposed to increase to about $800 billion by the year 2015. In the area of jobs, immigrant labor complements rather than competes directly with American labor because it's shaped like an hourglass. It's either extremely high skill or low skill. Everything in between is available for everyone else. In 2010, immigrants created 2 times the number of small businesses as did native-born Americans. Remember the high-tech boom? 25% of all high-tech jobs, companies were created by immigrants. They created 450,000 jobs. 45% of Fortune 500 companies were started by either immigrants or the children of immigrants. Where did Steve Jobs' dad come from? The test will be multiple choice, by the way, when we're done. From Syria. 25% of physicians are foreign-born or immigrant, children of immigrants. Half of the PhDs in STEM disciplines, science, technology, environment, mathematics, are immigrants. If we didn't have this labor, we'd be in a worse recession than we are, or coming out of a worse recession than we did. So now, as in the past, immigration is a vital part of our national economy. This is one I get the biggest kick out of. Salsa, America's #1 condiment. I'm from Ohio. I'm German in background, as you can tell from Schwab. ketchup is pushing the envelope for me in terms of heat. My wife, Judy, can eat jalapenos off the vine. I don't know how she does it. But salsa now is #1 condiment in the United States, and this is what the critics say about culture. They are changing our national character. We are a white Christian nation grounded in a European heritage. Okay? I swear. Before I talked about the 4 ways of immigration, and we are a diverse society. We're a diverse state. Over 70 languages are spoken in Arkansas. Did you know that? Over, I think, 74, 76. Now, Zesna gave a talk to my senior capstone course, and she was wonderful. There wasn't a dry eye in the room after she finished. And afterwards, I said, let me take you to lunch. So we went over to the Union. I think this is a perfect metaphor to this chapter. We went over to the Union, and Wednesdays is Indian Day. We had Indian food, right? I had the, what was it? We had the chicken marsala, something, whatever it was. It was good. It was 3,000 calories, which I didn't need. So I was standing there, and I turned around, and there's our sushi bar. And I turned over a little more. We have a made-to-order stir-fry of noodles and rice. And I turned over here, and here's our Mexican food bar, okay? And then I looked over to the Subway sandwich, and I said, we're safe there. Now they had the Italiano, they had the beef eater, the British beef eater, and then they had the Mediterranean, which is hummus. So I think our food is a good metaphor for our society. And you all live here. You know how this works. Immigrants come here. They come here with their customs, their culture, their dress, their language, and their food. We selectively borrow that which works. We Americanize it. Voila. It's part of us. And it's been going over for hundreds of years. So in my work, what I've found is we're simply in a process that we've done for hundreds of years. We're redefining what it means to be an American. And the evidence is overwhelming. I mean, it is overwhelming that our newest immigrants are coming here for the freedom and the economic opportunity that's found here, and that they have embraced our values, values which we have held for over 200 years and which have remained remarkably stable. And what I argue in the book is this is an asset. Imagine we're in a global economy, and we have people in the society who know that culture, who know that language, who have ties to that culture. You don't think that's an economic asset to use in business dealings? Don't squander it. And finally, the melting pot mix with just a few new ingredients, and the critics of assimilation say that undocumented immigrants will not be part of our melting pot tradition. They live in these insular ethnic enclaves. They're not learning English. They don't want to be part of us, and they never will be. Well, there is a new report out by Pew Research Center, and you get a chance, you can download it. Or you can buy my book. I mean, I suggest that. That's free, and by the way, all book proceeds are going for Dreamers Scholarship. And what you see is a very, very different story in the second generation. They are assimilating faster than the 3 previous waves. My mother's family came here in 1815. My father's family came in 1834. My dad was born in 1913, and they still spoke German in the household. Not anymore. Let's go through some of these. There's 4 ways that sociologists measure the assimilation, the acculturation of immigrant groups. One is through residential integration. Ethnic groups come in, they typically live in a neighborhood because it provides a buffer from the surrounding society. They can buy the food, they can have the churches, they can speak the language. It buffers the transition into a new society. What we know is that in the second generation, we're already beginning to see the dispersal of Hispanics and Asians into the fabric of our cities. John Logan, who is at Brown University, has a website called Census 2010, talks about international neighborhoods that we now find in cities with large ethnic populations, such as Denver and Houston and Dallas. We're getting international neighborhoods, African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, other ethnic groups, all living together. It's unique in American urban history. And I'm an urban sociologist, so I find it fascinating. So we look at generational change in terms of the urban mosaic, and what we find is that this group is doing it a little faster than the preceding 3 waves. What about socioeconomic integration? How well are they doing in the second generation? They're doing remarkably well. Whether we look at family income, whether we look at educational levels, whether we look at their percentage in professions, whether we look at how they identify them, by the second generation, a third think of themselves solely as Americans. And the rest think of themselves as Guatemalan American or Chinese American. And by the way, that ends in the third generation. They get along with others. They believe that they're far better off than they would have been if their parents had stayed in their home country. What about language? That's the big one that I hear a lot by the critics. Our current generation of immigrants is learning English far faster than the Italians or the Greeks or the Eastern Europeans who came here a century ago. 85% of those in their second generation either only speak English or speak English with high proficiency. And finally, the gold standard for integration and assimilation is intermarriage. 15% of all immigrants marry outside the group in the second generation. 26% of Hispanics marry outside the group in the second generation, and 23% of Asians. So the melting pot tradition continues. And we're in the 4th wave, and guess what? We're getting pretty damn good at it. This is the backdrop for my talk about the DREAM Act. And I wanted to share today my experience with a remarkable group of young people that I've had the privilege of working with over the last 5 years. I'm a demographer and a community sociologist. I began, as Marissa pointed out, I started studying the Hispanic community in Northwest Arkansas in 2007. I started focusing on Dreamers in 2011. Nationally, we have 2.1 million children and youth who are brought here by their parents, undocumented. We have approximately 9,000 in the state of Arkansas. And I mentioned before, I interviewed or collected biographies in about 50 of them. I conducted focus groups, and I attended their meetings. We sponsored one on our campus, and that's where I met Juan, I think. And Dave helped with that, so I appreciate that. What I found in my research was that their stories had common themes. Parents migrating to the United States for a better life, arriving here as young children not understanding why, traveling at night through dangerous and sometimes inhospitable territories. I had one student who was repeatedly raped in a crossover when she was 11, and arriving as a stranger in a strange land, increasingly hostile to their presence. But what I think I enjoyed most, and Zesna and Juan can tell you, there was not an interview I conducted, whether it was a small group or whether it was one-on-one, where people cried most of the time. I mean, just tears at your heart. But what I found them to be was remarkably bright and articulate and optimistic. They attended school, public schools, they learned English and were socialized as Americans. And as Dave mentioned, they have Arkansas accents. Now, Zesna and Juan are going to come up here, I hope, in a few minutes and say a few words. There's absolutely no way you can tell that they're not U.S. citizens. I mean, they're American in every way except status. So they were typical teens, and they were young adults, and they spent their free time listening to music, hanging with friends, attending Friday night games and dances, or worrying why they weren't dating and doing those other things. They were usually bilingual. They navigated effortlessly between 2 social worlds, and they were family and church related. Most worked to help their families. But unlike their classmates, they were undocumented and spoke of barriers and blocked opportunities, no driver's license when they turned 16, in some cases no class trips if air travel was required, no part-time jobs if you needed a social security number, and for many, far too many no college because they were denied admission or they were priced out of a college education by out-of-state tuition. I came to the conclusion that, like so many other things, our nation's immigration policy is broken. Our current system does not serve our national interests, and it leaves 2.1 million children and young adults in limbo. They find themselves in this cruel situation. Many members of Congress share my concerns about our immigration policy, and a bipartisan group of House and Senate members addressed the plight of undocumented children and young adults by introducing the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act in 2001. And the bill is very straightforward. If the undocumented youth enters the United States before they're 16, have lived here continuously 5 years on the date of the legislation's enactment, received a high school degree or GED, they could receive conditional immigration status for 6 years. This would allow them to pursue an education, to work, and to travel. Most importantly, the law would provide a path to citizenship. After a waiting period, participants could apply for a lawful permanent residency. They could earn a college, and if they earned a college degree or were honorably served at least 2 years in the military and maintained good moral character during this conditional status period, they could pursue citizenship. People who fail to do these things would simply go back and revert to their unauthorized status. The DREAM Act has failed to pass our Congress now for over a decade, and so states have taken over. 12 states have implemented their own laws that provide in-state tuition to undocumented students, and there are other states that do exactly the same thing through changes in policy, state policy. While it is not a fix-all, what it does do is it provides a path to a college degree that they're currently being denied because of financial and other factors. Although these laws do not provide a path to citizenship, they do provide a way undocumented students can get a college degree, indispensable in knowledge and information-based economy. I believe Arkansas needs to pass a law which is currently pending in our General Assembly. Senate Bill 915, I don't know what the House bill number is going to be, is the Education Reform and Economic Development Act of 2013. And I think the title of the bill is appropriate. It is about economic development. It is about not squandering the K-12 education that we've invested in as young people. Keep in mind, Arkansas is second from the bottom in the number of adults with college degrees. We need their labor. We need their skills. We need their talent. We need them to help drive this economy forward. We need to lower that barrier and make education more affordable. 2, Arkansas, like the nation, is rapidly aging. The average white in the state of Arkansas is 45. I look around this table and I see some baby boomers, right? You want your Medicare, you want your Social Security, you want someone to pay the taxes, you want someone to do the jobs that need to be done. Well, you better embrace our newest immigrants because 90% of all growth in our labor market in this country is going to come from first and second generation or third generation immigrants between now and the year 2050. It makes economic sense. I'll just look at some data that I just pulled up. DREAM Act would enhance the earning of these young people, 2.1 million people, by $2.3 trillion over their 40-year careers. And that's all money that goes into buying more, spending more, paying more taxes, growing an economy. But for me, it's a moral issue. We do not punish children for behavior of their parents. It's like debtor prison. These children and young people did not come here. They were brought here. They were not agency in this decision. And it's time for the American people to come forward and embrace this change, which is good for all of us. So as I said before, the Arkansas General Assembly has taken up the Educational Opportunity Economic Act of 2013, and I hope those of you here today who feel as strongly as I do will contact your representative and ask them to vote for Arkansas's DREAM Act. Thank you very much.
Great job. We've got time for a couple of questions. If you raise your hand, if you have a question, we'll get Bill to hand.
My question is for Juan. I read your profile in the book, and I was fascinated with the talk you had with Jeannie Burlsworth of Secure Arkansas. Could you tell us more about it and the other conversations you've had with other anti-immigration activists in the state?
Juan, would you?
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we appreciate your support. My experience with Ms. Burlsworth at the Capitol was pretty unique because we were there fighting HB 1008, I believe it was. That was a bill that was going to make it a law that undocumented students were going to have to pay out-of-state tuition instead of it just being a policy. And the conversation started after we were able to table the bill and stop it from being voted on. And the conversation started off as, you know, I just don't think you should be here. You don't belong. You broke the law. Anything that's in the book that's been said to us, it was said in just the first few minutes of the conversation. And I simply just said I would just like to share my story and share with you a little bit about myself so that you can understand where I'm coming from. And those first few minutes turned into a very, very long conversation. It turned into a conversation where I was able to share my story, share my struggle, share what I have accomplished without documents. After I told her that I was a business owner, that I create jobs, I pay, sales tax, I create that tax revenue. Dialogue started to change a little bit. No longer was it an us versus them. It was starting to come around. And towards the end of the conversation that I was having with her, one of her, I guess, assistants came over and said, we got to go. And she said, hello? Okay. And she said, no, wait, we're having a conversation. And so she kind of shooed him off, and we were able to finish our conversation. And I asked her, do you think do you think that after what I have shared with you, do you think that I should be deported? And she said, no. And so it's been many encounters like that with people who are anti-immigrant, but once we share our story, once we make that personal touch, the fact that I'm from Springdale, the fact that I grew up a Red Dog in Springdale, the fact that I grew up with the rivalries of Springdale and Fayetteville, the fact that I've grown up, as an Arkansan, definitely changes the dialogue because they no longer see you as something unknown. And I think that's what is in a lot of people is the fear of what's out there. Who are these people? We don't know who they are. But once you put a face to the struggle, to the bill, it's not just HB 1008. It's actually Juan or Cesna or Jose Luis or Ramon or Raul that you're affecting. I think that completely changes the dialogue, and it's why the Dreamer movement has been so focused on the story of self. In order for us to be able to tell our stories, I just heard somebody say a little while ago about when we go do lobbying at the state capitol is we stand around for hours for hoping 2 minutes, if that, with a politician. And that's why we have learned so well to craft our story to sometimes be about 45 seconds long, and we managed to pack in 15 years of just frustration and our education and our struggles and our accomplishments. We are able to pack them in so well that we are starting to change that dialogue and starting to change those mentalities of so much hate. And I really wish that, when you hear a Dreamer story, share it. I mean, Dr. Schroff has done such a good job in the book of sharing our stories, and I really hope that will start changing the dialogue with a lot of these anti-immigrant people, because I think that's the problem. They're unaware of who it is that they are affecting when they speak about us in that way.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you. Got a question? Yes, sir, right here. Wait for the microphone.
Thank you, Dr. Schaap, for what you're doing. I haven't read your book yet, but I don't know if you address some of the positions of our critics. Number one, secure borders. It is proved the big wall in China, the Berlin Wall, that walls don't really work. In addition to that, we're focusing on immigrants and not on drugs, arms, human trafficking, and others. So how we argue that secure borders is really not secure borders, far more than that. Second is that the media generally talks about the path to citizenship. Recently, I saw a report that only 30% of those that were able to become citizens by IRCA in 1996, only 30% became citizens. So I would argue that the only big advantage of becoming citizen other than a resident is the right to vote, which is a very political issue, but that's a fact. Another fact that people forget is that for every undocumented resident, there's a family. Their parents, the siblings. So anytime you talk about 11 million or whatever the number is, you're talking really 40 million, so 50 million of people that are affected but not having an immigration reform. Another thing that I don't understand why they insist in calling them illegal students. I mean, a person cannot be illegal. An act is illegal, but a person cannot be illegal. And in addition to that, another statistic says that 40% of undocumented residents in the United States came here legally with a visa, student, work, tourist, whatever, and state. So our system on controlling that also is a failure. And the last question is this. Governor Beebe, when he was Attorney General, he refused to sign the DREAM Act. What are the chances that if the DREAM Act is approved by the legislature, he will not veto it?
Well, frankly, I'm meeting with him tomorrow morning. If you leave me your cell phone, I'll call you. I am hopeful that we can get a Arkansas DREAM Act passed, that we can be above the fold of the New York Times with something that we can be proud of. So, I just wanted to say a couple things about borders. You know, the Mexican government doesn't support their borders very well either. You know, there's over 1 million Americans that live in Mexico. Did you know that? Did you know that? And what are the safest communities in the United States in terms of crime per 100,000? Along our southern border. So, I agree with you that Americans need to be educated, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, that we shine some light and some data on these issues. And as Juan says, one of the problems is fear, and if we understand the process better, understand the process which makes us great. I travel a lot, and we were at Jim's house last night. You know, travel is the great teacher, and my wife and I were in China about 18 months ago, and this is something that's always kind of stuck with me. We were at a university, and we had this wonderful room, maybe 150 Chinese students who all spoke English. I mean, how many of you speak Chinese? And I talked to a young woman who helped organize the evening, and I mean, they were lined up 10 deep to talk to us. They all want to come to the United States. And the woman who handles international education says, no one wants to go to Europe. No one wants to go to Australia. They want to come to the United States. Why? Because they know their talents and their skills, and their entrepreneurship is going to be valued and rewarded, and eventually they're going to be a part of the society. Go to France or go to Germany, and their ethnic groups will probably 100 years from now not be assimilated. And we do it in 3 generations. Yeah.
Let me just say that we're going to have to cut this off because I know there's a lot of questions because we've got to have time for book signing. Bill, I want to thank you for writing this book. Chancellor, I want to thank you for your strong stand for this. You deserve a lot of credit for standing up.